In this video, we're gonna create image search app, and during this project, we're gonna learn pagination in Jetpack Compose. We'll see how to use pagination, how we can manipulate all of the states that we are having in this pagination, and also we can discuss what is paging source, what is get refresh key. So basically everything that is regarding to the pagination, we will learn in this video. So let's get started. What is pagination? So let's understand the use case of pagination with a very simple example. So suppose in your Android device, you want to fetch information from the backend, and in that information, we are receiving list that contains 1000 item in it. So this is a very bad practice, because when you sending these kind of bulky objects at once to your Android device, it will affect the performance very badly. So instead of sending this bulky object at once from the backend, we'll use pagination. And what pagination means is, instead of sending this bulky information of 1000 item, we will create small chunks, and that chunks is called pages. Each pages contain a certain amount of list item in it. So when you transfer these pages instead of that bulky object, then this process is called pagination. First thing first, you should go to my GitHub repository, download the initial project, open up into your Android Studio. Now in this project, I have added all the dependency. So we have here a retrofit dependency, we have paging dependency, dagger dependency, and lastly we have coil dependency. Coil dependency is used to render images from URL, and on the top make sure to add dagger plugin and Kotlin annotation processor. In your root label, just add dagger plugin. Alright, so now we are good to go. So first thing first, I'm gonna create here 3 layers because I'm going to follow clean architecture pattern. So let's create 3 packages first. So first we have data layer, then we have domain layer, and lastly we have presentation layer. First I'm gonna move this UI and main activity in my presentation layer, and in our data I'm gonna create a package, name is model. So let me show you the API that we will consume in this project. So this is the website pixabay.com. You can simply log in, and after that open up this explore, go to this API, and these are the parameters that you can use according to your use case. So first thing first, we have our API key, then we have query. So let's say you want to search something, you can use these Q parameters. Just scroll down, we have page, per page, and this is the actual endpoint. So when you click on it, it will simply give you this type of response. So I'm going to simply copy this response, come back to my project, and in this model I'm going to create one more package naming remote, and in this remote I'm going to create data classes corresponding to this JSON and call this image response. Open this remote. You can see we have image response, and in this image response we are receiving hits. So instead of it, I'm gonna rename this thing image DTO. Alright, so in this data we have to create few more packages for dependency injection, for repository implementation, and lastly mappers. Go to the domain layer and first create few packages. Like for the model, we have model package, and in this I'm gonna create a data class, and the data class name is image. In this image we require only 2 things. So we require the ID and the image URL. Type of this thing is string, and one more thing, UUID. Type of this thing is a string, and I'm gonna use UUID dot random UUID and convert this thing into string. We'll use this parameter when we want to render this image in my pagination. Now in this domain we're gonna create our repository. So for that, let's create package naming repository, and in this repository we'll have an interface, and the interface name is ImageRepository. One function in it, function get images, pass your query. Return type is a little bit interesting, pager, and in this pager the key is integer and the value is image. Make sure this image is coming from your domain model. Go to your data layer, and in this dependency injection package I'm gonna create an object, and the object name is data module. First thing first, I want to install this thing in our singleton component container. Because it is a module, so use here module annotation. By the way, if you don't know about Dagger Hilt, you can watch my Dagger Hilt video. Anyways, let's continue with our project. So first I'm gonna provide our retrofit instance, because a retrofit is actually used to communicate with our backend. So we have here provide retrofit function, and it will provide retrofit instance. retrofit.builder. Make sure to mention your base URL. So just copy the URL from here and paste in here. So this is the base URL from here to pixabay.com. Next we have to use here converter factory. So this converter factory is actually used to convert your JSON response into model classes. So JSON converter factory dot create. And lastly, simply build it. So now we do have an instance of our retrofit. Make sure it is a singleton. Next, just create one more provide function, and this will provide the implementation of your API service that we haven't written yet. So let's write that thing. So to do that, in our data layer, I'm going to create one more package naming remote, and in this remote we have an interface naming API service. This API service contain one function, and this function is actually used to get the information from our backend. Just copy the endpoint from your data module, paste in here, so that it's very easy for us to take reference. So as you can see, this base URL is also already mentioned in our retrofit instance. We have to mention this thing. So API slash, okay, suspend function get images, and in this get images we have queries. So first query is regarding our key, API key. Type of this thing is string, and I'm gonna simply copy our key, not our, it's mine, and paste in here. Make sure the format of this thing is string. Okay, next we have to mention our query queue. So this query will actually contain the things that you want to search from the backend. Type is string. Next we have one more query. This query is regarding to the page. Type of this thing is integer, and it will return image response. So this is the interface, and this interface contain one function. Now the responsibility of retrofit is to provide implementation for this function. So in order to get the implementation, you should go to your data module and use here a function naming provide API service. Pass your instance of retrofit, and it will return the implementation of API service. Use your retrofit.create and mention your API service interface in here, and that's it. This will provide the complete implementation of your API service. Now it's time to begin with our pagination. So in pagination we have PagingSource, and the responsibility of PagingSource is to fetch information, manipulate the page number according to the requirement. So let's see how we can create PagingSource and write all of the logic regarding the pagination. So for that, in this data layer, I'm going to create a package, and the package name is PagingSource. And in this PagingSource, I'm going to create a class, and the class name is ImagePagingSource. This is a class, and this class will eventually use PagingSource. So key is integer, next is value, which is image, because we want image, and this image is present in our domain layer model. We have to override two functions in here, get refresh key and load. So we'll discuss later what is the meaning of get refresh key and when do we require get refresh key. For the time being, just focus on this load. So in this load, you have to write all of the logic regarding the pagination. So first thing first, just grep few information that is coming from this param parameter. So this will give me the page number. So use params.key. So key will eventually gives you the page number. So initially it is null, so I'm using 1. Next we have to get the page size, params.load size. And now I'm gonna use here try catch, because we are dealing with network request call, and sometime it will throw an exception. Okay, so once we receive an exception, we'll use here load result.error, and in this error I'm gonna pass my exception. Now in this try, first thing first, I'm gonna fetch the first page. So to do that, I'm using here a variable naming images, and take the instance of our API service. So in order to use API service, make sure in its constructor pass API service. Now let's use it. API service dot get images. API key is already passed, so we have to pass the query, and this query is also coming from our constructor. So private val query. Type of this thing is string, and simply use query in here. Next we have to pass our page number. So make sure to use the page number that we have been used in here in a form of variable. Now we had to write a mapper that is actually used to map our data transfer object into domain layer models. So for that, in this mapper, let me create an interface, and the interface name is mapper. This is a generic interface, so we want to transform our object from F to T. That contain a function naming map from F, and it will return you T. So this is my interface, and just below to it, I'm going to create one extension function. This is generic extension function. So we want to transform F to T. This is a extension over mapper. So use mapper F to T. Name of this thing is map all. Pass the list that you want to map, and the type of this thing is F, because we want to transform list of F to list of T. Now simply use list map, and in this map you can simply pass it. So this will transform your list of type F to list of type T. Cool. So let's use this thing. So for that, create a class, and the class name is ImageDTO to image mapper. This class will use mapper interface. So we want to transform ImageDTO to image. So use it. We have one function in here naming map, so simply override it. Return image. First we have to mention the ID. So ID is coming from .id. Make sure it is stringified. Next we have image URL. So in place of image URL, you can use from.largeImageURL, and UUID is already initialized, so just leave it. Okay, so make sure this constructor is attached in your dependency graph so that it's very easy for us to inject this mapper in our paging source. So go to your paging source and pass that mapper in here. So private val mapper, type of this thing is ImageDTO to image mapper. So let's use it. Now we are going to return here load result dot page. Just press Ctrl P to see the information regarding its parameters. So first we have to pass our data. Now this data uses mappers to map ImageDTO into domain model image. So mapper map all, and in this map all we gonna pass images dot hits. So this will give us the list of image. Next we have to write a logic to fetch the previous key. So let's write a logic for that. So first thing first, we have to check that our page, if it is equals to 1, that means we are currently standing on the first page. Previously we don't have anything, so pass null. Else if you are standing on the second page, that means previous page is 1. So in order to get the previous page, you can simply use your page and -1. So this will give you the previous page. Next we have to write a logic to get the next key. So if images dot hits size, if the size of this thing is less than the page size, that means we are reaching at the end of our pagination. Return here null. Else you can simply use your page, because we want to get the next key, add 1 in it, and that's it. This is the logic that will give you the previous key and the next key, and just add return in front of your try, and that's it. This is the logic that is actually used to perform pagination. Get refresh key is actually used to get the key. So let's say you are having 4 page 1 contain 1 to 10 item, page 2 contain 11 to 20, page 3 contain 21 to 30, and page 4 contain 31 to 40. Now you are currently standing on the page number 2 and you want to refresh your paging. On that scenario, this get refresh key is used to provide the current page to your load, so that it will continue the logic to perform pagination. This is the use case of get refresh key. Now let's see how we can actually retrieve the current page information. So for that we are using here anchor position. So anchor position will provide the item index that user is currently seeing on page number 2. So let's say it will return index 15, and index 15 is present in our page number 2. Okay, so now we have our viewport, or you can see anchor position. Using this anchor position, we'll first grab the closest page to position, and in this position we have to pass our anchor position. So simply pass your anchor position. Next we have to fetch the previous key. So let's say you are standing on the page number 2, that means our previous page will become what? 1. So 1 become our previous key. Okay, Now we want the information regarding our current page. So in order to get the current page, what you need to do, you simply need to add +1 in your previous key. So just add +1 and that's it. So this will give you the current page information. Now let's say you are standing on the first page, that means your previous key is null. So sometimes it will return null. To handle those kind of scenario, we'll use state closed page to position, pass your anchor point, and this anchor point is also containing the next key. Next key means, let's say you are standing on the page number 2, so your next key will become 2. So in this next key, you simply -1 to retrieve the current page. So this is the logic that you should use to get the key, return it. Okay, so this is a use case of get refresh key. So we are done with our image paging source. Now it's time to use it. So for that, go to your data layer, and in this data layer we have repository. In this repository, let's write the implementation for our image repository. So call this image repo impl. This is a class, and this class will eventually use our image repository. Control I, override get images. Return type of this get images is pager. So use here pager, and in this pager we have to pass config. This configuration is actually used in our pagination, or you can say paging source, to retrieve few information. So let's see what are the information in paging config we need to pass. So first we should pass our page size. So page size is 10. Next we have prefetch distance. So for me, I'm using here 1. So what is the use case of prefetch distance? So let's say you are currently standing on page number 1, and once you start seeing 9th item of your page number 1, just scroll little bit up. What it will do, it will trigger the load function to load the next page. So once you reach 9th item of your first page, it will trigger the load block to load new information regarding the second page. So this prefetch distance is actually used for those purposes. Next we have enable placeholder. So I don't want to use this thing, simply pass false. Initial load size, so I'm using here 10, and if you pass any other thing, you can do that thing very easily. We have here max size, we have here jump threshold, so I don't want to use that thing. So this is the first thing, configuration. Next we have to pass our paging source. So paging source factory, and in this paging source factory we are going to use image paging source, and the requirement of this paging source is API service, query, and ImageRepository mapper. So API service is eventually coming from the constructor. So pass API service in here. Next we have to pass our query. So query is coming from the get images. So use query. And lastly we have to pass mapper. So mapper is again coming from the constructor injection. So private while mapper, and the mapper name is ImageRepository to image mapper. Pass it. And that's it. Just add this repository implementation in your dependency injection graph. Return your pager. So we are done with our repository implementation. Now it's time to jump in our domain layer and write use cases. So in our domain layer, first thing first, let me create package, and the package name is use case, and in this use case I'm gonna create one use case naming get image use case. I mean, we are not fetching one image, we are fetching a list of images. So use here get images. This is a class, and in this class first I am going to use here constructor injection, and in this constructor injection we will inject our image repository. Use operator function invoke, pass your query, type of this thing is string, image repository, get images, pass your query, and that's it. We are pretty much done with our use case. So data layer and domain layer is pretty much done. Now it's time to begin with our presentation layer. So in this presentation layer we have to create our view model. So for that, go to your Kotlin class /file, and I'm gonna call this main view model. This is a class. This class eventually extend view model, hilt view model, and I want to perform here constructor injection. So simply use here inject constructor, pass your use case. So in our case we need to use here get images use case. So first we have to create a variable which actually used to hold the query. So name is query, mutable state flow, empty string. Next we have a function update query, and this update query function is actually used to update our query. Query update, pass your query. Next we have our actual images. So I want to use my query and filter it out. If it is not blank, then only will proceed. And also I want to attach threshold of 1 second. Then we will use here flat map latest. So this will give me the latest query. Now use your use case, invoke it, pass your query in it, and just grep out the flow. Cast this thing in your ViewModel scope, and we are done. So these are some experimental things. So simply add flow preview class and experimental coroutine API. So we are pretty much done with our ViewModel. Now in our main activity, we shall begin with our composable. So composable name is main content, and in this main content we have to pass our ViewModel, and the ViewModel name is main ViewModel. So just use some main content in here. So in our main content we are going to pass first modifier, and padding is coming from inner padding. We have to pass our ViewModel. So in order to create ViewModel, I'm using here ViewModel variable, use height ViewModel, mention your ViewModel type which is main ViewModel, and pass it in here. So this is our main content. Now in our scaffold, I'm gonna create top app bar. So this top app bar will eventually contain our text field that is used to write the user query. So top app bar will eventually contain a text field, and in this text field we have to pass the value and on value change operation. So in order to hold query value, I'm gonna create query state mutable state of empty string, and make sure to use here var, just import remember saveable. So in this text field we have to pass value. So pass your query, and if anything changes in your text field, you should simply update your query, and also update query which is present in your ViewModel. So this text field having modifier fill max width. Okay, so we are pretty much done with our top app bar, or you can say search text. One more thing, use here safe content padding so that it won't go behind your status bar. So yeah, we are pretty much done with our initial setup for this scaffold, and now we shall begin with our main content. Now in this main content, I'm gonna use my images. So ViewModel images, and collect this thing in a form of lazy paging items. Images will have a lot of things. We have here load state, and in this load state we have append. Append means the next page, prepend means the previous page, and refresh is used when you want to refresh your paging items. So let's write logic to handle all of these states. So first let me create here lazy vertical grid, use columns, and in this grid cells I'm using here fixed, and the count is 2. We have to use some modifier that we are receiving from main content. So this is our lazy vertical grid. So in this lazy vertical grid, I'm gonna check if our images dot load state is of a type of load state dot loading. I mean load state of what? Load state of prepend. So if it is a case of loading, on that in this we have a box having modifier fill max width, and the content alignment is on the center. Make sure this is coming from alignment dot center. In this we have circular progress indicator. So this is a composable, and composable is only invocable in a composable. So use item. So just add this thing in a form of item. Alright, so this is for the prepend. Copy this stuff and paste in here. Similarly goes for the append. Okay, so next we are going to deal with the error cases. So images load state prepend. If it is a type of error, on that case I'm using the same item, but this time instead of using circular progress indicator, I'm using here text, or you should use here button. And this button is having a modifier of fill max width, and we have here on click. So when user click on it, I'm simply using images and want to retry, and in its UI I'm gonna say retry. So this is a case of error, so simply copy this thing up and paste just below to your loading of append, and just convert this thing from prepend to append. So we do handle two things. We handle the loading state and the error state. Now we are going to actually handle the success state. So for that we check if our images dot load state refresh is not loading. That means we successfully fetch the information. So in this case I'm using a condition. If our images dot item count is 0, that means we are not receiving anything. So in this case just use box having modifier fill max size, content alignment is on the center, and in this we have a text, and just say nothing found. Because it is a composable, so this composable is only invocable within a composable. So if you want to handle a refresh state, I believe you should handle this thing outside of your lazy vertical grid. So I want to use the same logic but out of my lazy vertical grid. So if it is a case of refresh and I'm receiving item count 0, that means we are going to show this information, I mean nothing found from the backend. Okay, now just scroll down and here write one more condition, images load state dot refresh. If it is a type of load state dot not loading, that means we are receiving the images item count. If it is not equivalent to 0, that means yes, we do receive a lot of images. Okay, so now we are going to use items, and make sure to use items that has count in it. So in this count I'm gonna use image item count. Next we have here key. Now this key is actually coming from images dot item key it dot uuid. So now we are using uuid things. So next we have to pass the content type. So again this content type is coming from images dot item content type, and you can simply pass in here content type. I mean it's totally up to you. Lastly we are receiving the item content, I mean lazy vertical grid scope. So let's use that thing and render our UI. So in this lambda we are receiving index, and I'm using here async image, and this async image is coming from coil library. So in this model we have to pass the image URL. So use images dot get, pass your index, and in this index we have image URL, simply pass it. Next we have here content description. So content description is null. We have content scale, so in place of content scale I'm using here content scale dot crop. Next I'm gonna define the modifier. So modifier fill max width and height is about 200 dp. Import this dp, and also I want padding, so padding is 2 dp only. And yeah, we are pretty much done with it. So now it's a good time to execute our application to see whether it is working or not. But before that, let me set up my Dagger. So first annotate main activity with Android entry point, and lastly we have to create a base application. This base application extend application, and on the top use hilt android app, and in your manifest you should register your base application, and on the top use permission for internet, otherwise your whole project will be go in the vain. Alright, so now I'm going to execute our application to see whether everything works or not. Alright, so I think I made a very silly mistake. So instead of putting our base application in data, you should drag this thing in your image search app. Go to your manifest and yeah, re-execute our application. I think we have a problem regarding the dependency. Image repository cannot be provided without and provide. Okay, so we have to provide image repository implementation. So go to your data layer dependency injection data module, and below create one function naming provide function provide image repository and its implementation. So return image repo impl. This contains three things: API service, mapper. So pass API service and mapper. So mapper is a type of image DTO to image mapper. Pass API service and mapper in it. Re-execute our application. Okay, so here you can see it is working, and in this I'm gonna type Android. Okay, so here you can see we have images related to the Android. Now when you scroll down, as you can see we have this small progress bar which is coming from append state. So let me show you this thing very clearly. So to show you that thing, go to your image paging source, and in your images, before that just use delay of 3 seconds because we are in the suspend block, so it works. Re-execute our application and type here Android. So it will take 3 seconds, and after 3 seconds we have all the information. Scroll up, you can see there we go, we have append data. Similarly it works for the prepend, but I don't think so we are going to see prepend state because the information that we are receiving over here will be cached in our ViewModel scope. Due to that reason we don't able to see the prepend state. That's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed a lot. It's a very simple video, but at the same time if you don't know about pagination, then I think this video is very helpful for you. So if you like this video, subscribe my channel and also write your comments in the description box. And if you are having any suggestion, please write that thing too in my comment box. We will meet in our next video where we will discuss something new about this pagination. Till that, goodbye.